Welcome back to the Guided Podcast. Amanda here and Alley Cat. And this week, we have some sad news. Yeah.
Well, the good news is Amanda's back from Burning Man. She didn't get stuck in the mud.
No, I did get stuck in the mud.
You did get stuck in the mud. Okay, well, you made it out. You're not trapped in one of those concrete sculptures of a penis that somebody made. If you haven't seen it, you really should look that up on the internet and see the ways that the burners handled it. It was completely different than what the news media showed, but we'll do a second episode on that. This one, as you can hear, I'm in deep grief because I have an alarm set to go off every 20 minutes or so to remind me to breathe.
Yeah.
I'm in deep grief because 2 days ago, I got the call from Ukraine that the man that you've all been hearing about here and that I had fallen in love with was killed fighting in combat in Ukraine. And I've been processing that grief since then. And it's, something to show up here and know what to say and how much to say, because I want to say everything. I want to tell you everything. And yet there were some things that I wasn't ready to talk about yet. And yet now I want to talk about all of it, and yet it's not entirely true yet to talk about all of it because of the complexities in his relational field and in his family dynamic that I want to honor. And so today, I think what I want to share about is a few of the lessons from this relationship, from being such a full yes to him, to the decision that I made on the episode that you all heard about, integrity, when you change your mind, from August 21st. On that episode, you heard me talk about the decision that I made to not attend one of the modules of the program, the Luminous program that Amanda and I were in together, and instead to stay and go on a camping trip because I needed to make my choice, and I notice we don't even talk about this in the show notes, but the choice that I made was to make a choice through the lens of, if I was dying, what choice would I make? If I knew I was dying, would I go to the module or would I go camping with him and my friends here? I'm so grateful
that you're glad you made that choice, because
we're all dying.
Someone was dying. Your intuition.
We're all dying. And
yeah, we're all dying.
And then in the next episode about the reality show, he and I were making a reality show together. We had started filming it, and the name of it was intended to be We're All Dying. And the other night when I was processing his death with a few of the others who he deeply impacted, we decided that the name of the show is We're All Dying to Live. We're all dying to live, because when we can really let that in, when we can really let it in that we are all dying, it's a different place from which to make our choices. It's truly one of the best ways to allow ourselves to be guided by life, is to know that our time here is so short. And especially for him, it was so short. He had just turned 28 years old. And his impact on my life and the lives of those that he spent time with was significant. We met on June 6th, right after I came back from Egypt. And he died on September 6th. Or maybe the 5th, we don't know. What I know is that he went out of contact with me on Monday after being in very, very consistent contact with me while he was gone. His last message to me came Monday morning, September 4th, and then I got the call from Ukraine on September 6th. And sometime in that time, he went out on a mission, even though he was not there to go on a mission. He had fought in Ukraine for 1 year in 2020, about from the spring, March of 2020 through December, when he came back home. Because the child that he was raising with his former partner, who was actually not his son, or not his biological son, but he called him his son. He was his son. And that was an example of the kind of man he was, and that he wanted to be, is to show up so much for everyone else, to show up so much for everyone else. And he had gone back on August 25th, when everybody else was going to Burning Man. Instead, he was going to Ukraine to train the men there. And he was not supposed to go on a mission. But there was a part of me and a part of him that knew. And so before he left, I helped him to create his will and to write letters to his former partner and to the son that he was raising with her, and as well the son that she is carrying that is his.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Because there was some part, I think, of both of us that knew that he might, of course, not come back. He was going to war. And even though he was on the front lines for an entire year, and he made it back. We knew, he knew, there was a part of us that knew. And I can say a lot more about that on a future episode, because I don't yet want to talk about what he was going through before he left that had me have that knowing. And that what I want to say today is that he died a hero. He died a hero doing what he felt was the most important thing that he could be doing. And one of the things that he wrote to me on August 28th is, "I love it out here. I'm so happy to be here, to be doing something to end this fucking atrocity. He was saying it's making me more and more spiteful of the selfish, narcissistic society our country has developed into. This is absolutely not okay to allow to happen to the children of this world. But because it's inconvenient or too far from home, no one gives a fuck about these people's lives. And then he said, we're talking about conducting an operation with the students as their final part of the training. It only makes sense since they're going to do it anyways. We might as well be there with them. And I asked him when. He said it would be at the end of the training before I leave. We're all highly motivated to kill as many of these bastards as we can. And he shared that he had driven through one of the cities that they liberated at this time last year, and he said it felt really rewarding to drive through and see them begin their rebuilding process, and knowing that that was part of his work. And he sent me a picture. I woke up in the middle of the night on August 30th, and I said, I woke up in the middle of the night worried about you. Please let me know that you're good and focused on staying alive. He said, I'm good, sweetheart. I'm good. We're training. Sweet dreams. Then he sent me a photo of him training, and he said, my happy place. So I know that he was where he wanted to be, and I know he was doing what he wanted to do, what was most important to him. And I'm leaving for Iceland today with my children to go on a trip with Mike Posner and about 60 other people. And he was supposed to meet us there. And yet when I asked him about the things that he wanted to do there, he said he found it really difficult to even think beyond where he was. I know.
The spirit knew he wasn't good.
And then on Saturday, I asked him how he was, and he said, I'm doing well. The students are getting really good. We're planning on some cool stuff. And I said, please remember your will to live. He said, ha, ha, ha. I have a will to live, but some things are out of our hands. And he sent me a kissy emoji. And then on Monday, he sent me a message early in the morning and then didn't respond to my response. And I think he left for the mission then. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Why do we have
Why
to have
do
war?
we have to have war?
And we spent the night of his death asking that question with the people that he had become closest to in my life, with me, the Life family, Christopher and Sophia and Amelie. We gathered. And we spent about 6 hours in the process of making sense of his death. And what we came to is that he impacted all of us incredibly deeply. And there's several things that we will remember him for, and that we will stand for in his name. And that is that he was a unique combination of a man who was living right in the center and attempting to live even more and more right in the center between the two poles of love and power. The two poles of love and power. And that when you really look at love and power, and you integrate those two into a higher truth that is not what can seem like the opposite between love and power, what you get is justice. And that's what he stood for, is justice. And Christopher and Sophia are the two people in my life who have most taught me how to look at life through the lens of death. About maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I went to a retreat they held called the All In for All Life retreat. And we did an exercise there where we allowed ourselves to truly come face to face with our death. And it was such a critical moment. And they've created a poem, a prayer, really, a prayer, the All In for All Life prayer. And the first line of the prayer has been, "The choice is ours to rise and act." And that wasn't always the first line of the prayer. The first line of the prayer used to begin with, "We are sovereign descendants." I'll have to get the actual first line that it used to be. And about 2 years ago, when we were all in a very big group process with a woman named Alanya at the Star House, which will be a story for another day. That one's a big story. When Christopher met Alanya, he added a new line to the beginning of the poem, which he only does very rarely because it's been a prayer that has been in the making for many, many years. And that line was, instead of "We are sovereign descendants of sacred blood," that line was, "The choice is ours to rise and act." And so the other night when we were honoring Jericho and remembering Jericho and who he was and what he stood for, the first line of the prayer changed to, "The choice is ours to rise and act justly." Justly. Because the choice isn't ours to just rise and act. Because if we just rise and act, we may not act justly. We might keep repeating the same patterns. And if there was one thing that Jericho was a stand for, it was healing. It was healing, and he was in the middle of a deep healing journey. And that journey in so many ways began for him several years ago, interestingly enough, at the Tribalize event here in Boulder or in Loveland at Sunrise Ranch. I didn't meet him there, though I was there. And he was probably 21, 22 years old. And he was blessed in that moment to meet a woman named Yerlin, a woman that we'll interview here. And he was at a time in his life of deep emotional struggle. He was really suffering with depression and self-hatred. And he met Yerlin. And he immediately said yes to, he was guided. He was guided to say yes to changing his plans, much as I did after my trip to Burning Man, when Eben guided me to a David Data workshop. He was guided to a Yerlin workshop, and he went to Denver, and he learned her process. And immediately, in minutes after learning her process, he changed. He found self-love. And because of that, now many years later, when he came into our lives, he showed us an example, a living example of a man who could make a choice, to change his internal way of being, to be in the world, to be the change that he wanted to see in the world. And he exemplified that for us. And so it's so poignant, perhaps is the word, poignant, that the first line of the prayer is, the choice is ours to rise and act. Because he exemplified that for us. The choice is ours to rise and act. And he was also in the midst of a major struggle with his choices, with seeing the impact of his choices that he had made that were being made from a place of extreme inner conflict between the values that he held. On one hand, family values, wanting to have family with the woman that he had been in relationship with for many years, but just wasn't able to make it work. Because on the other hand, he wanted his freedom. He wanted his freedom. And having his freedom seemed to him to come with a tremendous amount of shame. Shame and guilt and pain. Because if he was living in his freedom, it created pain for others. Or at least it seemed to. And I think one of the reasons that he came into my life and I came into his life was to show him a way that he could stand in his freedom and stand in his sovereignty and also be in the unity that he wanted to have, also be in the divine union that he wanted to have. And if he had come back, he would have been walking that path of sovereign unity, learning to stand in his sovereignty, in his truth, learning to communicate his truth in such a way that while it might cause pain for others, he could be with them in that pain and recognize that hiding the truth because he wants to protect people from that pain is never the way. And he was seeing that. He was seeing that there was a way to live in his truth and to speak his truth and then be with the pain that would arise for those who wanted something different. Because that's the pathway to sovereign unity. The pathway to sovereign unity and what I believe is a true divine union. Union with spirit, union with myself, union with you, is to stand in my truth and then be with you in the impact of that truth. And that's the hardest thing in the world, I think. But it's the place that we resolve the inner conflict. And I believe it is then the place that we also resolve the outer conflict, because the outer conflict is simply a reflection of all of us. Of course, there is war out there because we are at war inside of ourselves. Because we haven't yet learned how to stand in our truth and be with the pain that truth can sometimes cause to others. So instead, what do? We either compromise our truths. We hide our truths, sometimes even from ourselves, because it's too painful. Not just for ourselves, but because of the pain that we imagine impacting on others. And that's what he was doing. When he was not standing in his truth, it was because he wanted to protect the people he loved who wanted something different for him or from him.
Which is why we always have an opportunity, something that you and I say a lot to each other that I love so deeply, is I want what you want.
I choose what you choose.
I choose what you choose.
Even if it causes me pain.
Even if it's hard.
I want
what you want. I choose what you choose. And you did that so beautifully with him. You wanted what he wanted and you chose what he chose. And he chose to go and experience living out his true dharma, to really to go and, like you said, be the change. And it was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful gift that you gave to him.
It's
And
so funny, you know, when you say that
I
he was
can
going to
just
live out his dharma. He was a really funny human. Really funny. It's one of the things that I liked about him the most. He's so funny. And he would say, "It's my dharma." And he'd put on an Indian voice. Because, yeah,
I can
it's
hear
my
him.
dharma.
It's my dharma.
Yeah. And
It's my
I
dharma.
bring that up because while his dharma was very serious, he held life lightly. He held life lightly. Maybe because he had been in war for a year. He knew that life was for living. And I remember one moment at which I was upset about something. I can't recall what it was, but it had something to do with him, I think. I was upset about something. Or I wanted something to be different, or something. And he just looked at me and he said, "We're going to die. We're going to die." And it brought me right back to that present moment of savoring that time with him. And I think that's what I want to impart more than anything to all of you that are hearing this. Please remember, we are dying. And our job is to savor each moment as much as we possibly can, to savor each moment as much as we possibly can, to enjoy it fully, to laugh and to cry, to feel as much as we can through these bodies, because that's what we lose when we die. The ability to be in these physical forms. And I think that's part of why, you know, in some ways he was extremely hedonistic. And that caused pain for people that didn't want him to be hedonistic. They just wanted him to be with him, which I totally or be with them which I totally understand, because he was so amazing. How could everyone not want as much of him as they could get? Of course. And he wanted to give all of it. And I do believe that while part of it came from an addictive quality that he was facing, he was about to start facing, and I'll talk more about that on another show, how he came to that and how he was able to begin to process that. Because I think it's really important for all of us to look at our addictions, of course, and where we're being driven from our wounds and where we have healing to do. Part of that hedonism as well was that he was savoring all of life fully. And one of the things that I wish for all of us is that we learn how to use these forms that we have incarnated into in the highest and best way, in service to all of life, which includes ourselves. And sometimes we can forget that and think that being in service to all of life is just being in service out there, but it is also to ourselves. And then we get to have the job of really understanding, what does it mean to be in service to ourselves in a healthy way? And I think on our next episode, Amanda, we're going to touch on that, because I think you had a big experience of that at Burning Man. And seeing where maybe we don't really know how to be in service to all of life, including ourselves, in a really healthy way, because we haven't learned, we haven't been taught. We haven't had good models For what does it really mean to be in service to all of life, starting with ourselves? Even though the airline pilot says, put your oxygen mask on first, we don't know how to do that.
And yet, if we don't do that,
Inside, we die inside.
Die. And then we can't be that we die inside before we die outside. We slowly break down. We slowly come to a breaking point because we're not taking care of this vessel, of the self, of the being, of the spirit that is our unique essence in this lifetime. And yeah.
So I think you saw some really big examples of that. And so we'll talk about that. Oh, yeah.
Can we take a deep breath together? Deep breath in through your nose. Exhale, make a sound. Yeah, there you go. I'm going to do one more of those. Breath in through the
nose. There's just a few more things that I want to say here before we close. So as I mentioned, I met him on June 6th, although it was really a re-meeting. I had met him about 5 years ago in Ojai when he was with his former partner. And when I met him then, I was really blown away by him. And what I was most blown away by is really how much he loved her. How much he loved her. He loved her so much. And he loved her so much right up until the day he died. He didn't know how to love her in the way that she wanted to be loved, while he also loved himself in the process. And that makes a lot of sense. You know, he was in his 20s. And I think he was in a big question around what is love. And it's a question that I myself faced through my 30s and early 40s. And I remember one day asking that question of myself, what is love anyway? What is it? What is it? Because back then I thought love was something that I got. And I've come to realize since then that love is something that we give. And that we don't always give it in the way that people want it. And we'll do a whole episode on what is love. But when I met him on June 6th, I was just back from Egypt. And today it is now September 8th. He died, sometime on September 6th. And so we had these 3 very potent months together, June, July, and August. And in that time, we began to film a reality show. And I will continue that show. I hope that it will be called We Are All Dying. But now we've added on another part. We are all dying. We're all dying to live. And I pray in his name that show will teach us how to make the choice to rise and act justly. And to integrate the parts of ourselves that have not had models of love, that have not had models of how to do internal conflict in a way that conflict can heal rather than kill. And I pray that show will be an opportunity for me to not only show the inner workings of my own life and my relationship with my children and their dad and my community here, the incredible community that has shown up with such support. And the one thing that has become clear through all of this is, wow, I am so supported. Life really does have my back. But that I will also be able to work with adult kids and their parents on the show to do the work of healing the lineage and creating a new future reality for these families so that they can really understand the meaning of inheritance and what we have inherited and how we can transmute and alchemize the pain of a legacy that we have inherited of scarcity and survival and create a new future reality that is truly based in thriving, that is truly based in right relationship with all of life, with ourselves, with each other, with the planet, and create not just generational wealth, but true regenerative wealth by learning to come together, by having the models that we need to see in the world of people who are doing it, who are doing the hard work. So instead of just seeing toxic drama, we can see examples of people actually in their pain bodies and then being held in love through the transmutation and alchemization process, where we stop projecting and blaming and shaming and instead take full ownership and responsibility of that which we are feeling and bring forgiveness and compassion to ourselves and each other and truly hold ourselves and each other together in intimacy, because this is what we have not seen. We haven't seen true intimacy. We have not been modeled true intimacy where we can be in the full pain of life and stay in the connection and stay in the relationships. Instead, we so often just end up in our trauma response and then we fight because it's how we've been taught to have connection, through fight. Or we run because the flee response comes up, or we compromise ourselves with fawn, or we freeze and isolate. All of that is trauma response. But we have an opportunity to actually be in intimacy with each other, to actually truly be in love. And one of the things that Jericho picked up from me and through me is something that I received from Forrest Landry. Love is that which enables choice. Love is that which enables choice. I want what you want. I choose what you choose. Even when it's really hard for me. And so, Jericho Sky, you are now truly a Skywalker. It is not what I would have chosen. It is not what I wanted. And yet, I want what you want and I choose what you choose. And I am willing to be with this pain and this grief so that I can transmute it and alchemize it through this body in love. In love. And I will continue to show up in love in your name and carry your memory and the man that I knew you to be, the full range. The full range. You were a full range human. And now you are a Skywalker. And I honor you. And I love you.
Yeah. Allie, thanks for sharing. Thanks for being so willing to be vulnerable. Thanks for being so willing to show yourself for the sake of those that are listening to our show. And, there's so much that you shared in today's episode. I think that
Mm-hmm.
someone could probably listen back to this 3 or 4 times and just keep getting nuggets of wisdom. But not just get a nugget of wisdom. You have to ask
Yeah.
yourself, am I living that?
Yeah.
Am I living like I'm dying? What would I do today? What's one thing I would do today if I was living like I was dying?
You are dying. We are all dying. How do you choose to live your life knowing that? So for me, I am choosing to go to Iceland with my children. He was going to meet us there. And of course, obviously now he's not. And interestingly enough, the other night, my kid's dad has been struggling with addiction for his whole life. And I've been in relationship with him now 30 years. 30 years. As long as Jericho was alive, I've been in relationship with Todd. Is that possible? Is that really true? Gosh, time is weird. Todd and I met when I was
Since you were 21?
We met.
20. So yeah, 29 years, turning on 30 in November.
And and he's been struggling with addiction now his whole life. And it had gotten pretty bad over the summer. It had gotten pretty bad. It wasn't getting better. And he had finally called me for help, which he had never done before. He had never called me for help before. He'd always tried to hide it. And he finally called me for help. And he bolted upright in the middle of the night, the other night. And I'm creating a story in my heart and in my reality that it was at the moment that Jericho died. And he bolted upright in the middle of the night and decided to stop drinking in a way he says that he never has before. In a way that it landed in his system that he could just stop. And that is where the choice comes from, by the way, for all of us. He called it an epiphany. It's an epiphany any of us can have at any moment, a choice just to do it different, just to be different, just to stop doing the thing that is harming us. And so I've created this story that Jericho's spirit came to him and shared that epiphany with him. And so Todd's coming with us to Iceland. So I'm going with my family. I'm going with these people I gave birth to and the man that I have struggled with over the past 30 years and loved and created family with. And I really wish that Jericho was coming. And yet I know that this is what's right. Because this is what is. This is what is. I love you.
Love you.
I love you. And I'm excited to hear about your journey to Burning Man and back.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you for listening. And if this episode touched you, if it resonated, if it sparked something within you, it would mean the world to us to share this episode in memory of Jericho
Skywalker. Jericho Skywalker. He hadn't legally changed his name to that yet, but it was coming, and now he is that. Jericho Skywalker. We will remember you always.
If you enjoy the Guided Podcast, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. And be sure to come back next week. Until then, this is Allie Katz and
Amanda Goolsby.
remember, life knows.